Hi, Justin. My name is Alexei, and I am a modern Gnostic. And I'm answering your question on the forum Mystical Orders of the Gnostics. And you asked, someone told me that Gnostic is satanic. What's your view? So I'm going to answer that for you. And of course, everybody wants to say any divergent view is satanic. I mean, there's tons of people who say this about. They say Catholicism becomes satanic. They say Mormonism is satanic. Jehovah's Witness. They say anything, and some people will say Harry Potter is satanic. So you've got to take. When somebody says that, often they really haven't put much thought into it. So. If you really want to get a pulse on the first century polemics that were going on between different Christian groups, first and second centuries, read Elaine Pagel's book, The Origin of Satan. And every time I say one of these biblical scholars, especially who are not believers, people freak out and say, why are you reading them? Read everything. Read everything and question everything. You don't have to agree with the author, but it's very rare for an author to not have something good to share with you, even if you don't agree with everything, all their conclusions, right? They give you good research, they give you good thought processes, and then they may draw conclusions on their own research that might be different from yours. But consider everything, and let the Spirit be your guide. If you believe in God, then follow the Spirit. What is He teaching you? Okay? So that's a great book because it really brings you into 2,000 years ago when there's all these different Christian groups and people have different different understandings. Some were given different pieces of information. Some were given more information. Some were given less information. That's divinely inspired information, and they build their religious framework around the information that they received. And it's not to say that somebody's wrong and somebody's right. If we each learn line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little until we come to a fullness of truth, then we might all learn something different. But in the end, it may all fit together in ways that we never imagined. And the end goal of all of this spiritual study and knowledge is definitely something that we can't imagine now. It's not exactly what we think now. It's not a this or that, right or wrong. We're coming into a realization of what everything is and who we are. And it's a process. Okay? And so, backing up to your question, there's polemics which demonize, and they stem from fear, okay? And Satan is the epitome of fear. He is the embodiment of fear. He uses fear as a powerful motivator to enslave people, to entrap them. Fears are what prevent. So all these groups, they would tell each other. The leaders would tell their flock, don't trust that group over there, right? Because the leaders themselves were afraid of losing power. So they would say, don't trust that group over there. Don't listen to them. Don't follow them. They are contaminated by the spirit of the devil. And if you listen, if you go to their meetings or what have you, you will catch their contamination. So that's how they framed it, right? But none of that is godly. Like, that's not found in the scriptures. It's not justifiable by the scriptures. That's just fear-based power and control, right? So when we look at what really is satanic, it's, you can't figure it out without going back and looking at the whole history. I mean, 3,000 years BC, 4,000 years BC, all the way up until the present day. You got to look at everything, and you got to look at the future. You got to look at where we're going, right? So, you know, most of the Christians out there who are so certain about their beliefs that they have no clue about their own religious history. They have no idea whatsoever. You know, and they don't understand polemics because they engage in them today. Fear-based, you know. I mean, I grew up in the 90s, and there I met Baptist people who believed that Mormons really did have horns on their head. I mean, how do you... I thought it was mystifying in the 90s, but those people really existed, right? People can believe anything. And if fear is a motivator, you know. So getting back to this idea, like, who and what is satanic, and who are the real Christians, right? Now, if you ask a Gnostic, right, the ancient Gnostics, they would tell you that the Gnostics are the real Christians. As the Bible says, many are called and few are chosen. And so, you know, non-Christians, they don't have a relationship with God at all in the Gnostic viewpoint. So they're neither called nor chosen. But the Orthodox Christians, to a Gnostic, are the called, because they understand Christianity with the mind, but they don't understand it spiritually, right? And it takes spiritual discernment, as Paul says. You know, you cannot discern the things of the Spirit with the mind or with the ego. You have to discern by the Spirit, your Spirit, which is the good in you, which is the breath of God that He animates your body with. He gives you a portion of His Spirit. The Spirit of Christ is born in everyone who comes into the world. And so that's in you, and from that, you can, if you get your ego aside and you get your flesh aside, you put your mind aside, all the corrupt parts of you, because we're all part corrupt and part pure, right? You put that aside, then you can have a pure existence that connects with God in purity and receives from God in purity, which is that is what Gnosticism is about. It's about connecting with your spirit to God's Spirit, to receive directly from Him, and to become enlightened, to open up your mind, and to not use your physical senses, because the world is illusory, and the physical senses they'll entrap you, enslave you, they'll deceive you. But the Spirit speaks truth. So the Spirit speaks... Hold on one second. Okay. So, spirit to spirit. Spirit speaking truth to spirit, and it happens in a spiritual realm, and it doesn't use the mind, not the human mind that most people think of. It doesn't use the human senses, although you can have things by the senses. But what Gnosticism really is revelation. It is what every prophet has ever received, not by their senses, but through their spirit, in communion with God. Realizing who they really are in the presence of God and how they connect with God. So that's what Gnosticism really is. Now, to the orthodoxy, this is terrifying. It's threatening. Because orthodoxy is in itself apostate. It's corrupt. It got off of what Jesus was teaching to his apostles, which he was teaching revelation, right? So Jesus tells Peter, he says, who do they say I am? And Peter says, well, some say you're, a great teacher. Some say you're a prophet. Some say you're Elias returned. You're John the Baptist, So as Jesus is going out, he's preaching to different groups. He gives different information to different groups, right? And so there's different groups who understand different things about Jesus from their points of view. And he's not revealing himself to them, but he has his own disciples. But of his own disciples, he doesn't even tell them everything. He asks Peter, he says, well, who do you say I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, blessed are you, son of Jonah, because flesh has not made this known to you, but my Father in heaven made it known to you. Peter knew who Christ was by revelation. It was something that Christ couldn't even tell him. And so it was that revelation that's the most important. Because Jesus can speak to Peter as a man, and Peter's going to filter all of the teachings in through his mortal brain. But he doesn't become an adult, a real spiritual man, a perfect man, until he connects with God and he receives that knowledge for himself. Not secondhand, even from the lips of Christ. He needs that Spirit of Christ in him personally. Which is why Christ said, I've got to leave. I've got to die. I've got to go, and I will send my Spirit to dwell with you. Oh, yeah, no, this is boring. Come here. So that is the quintessential, that is what Gnosticism really is. Now, Gnosticism, of course, can be corrupted like anything else. Every ideology can be can fall into apostasy, and when that happens, it morphs. It turns into something it goes from being inspired to not inspired. Now that can happen. So not everything that parades under the banner of Gnosticism is going to be good. But not everything that parades under the banner of orthodoxy is good either. And as a matter of fact, you'll find most of what calls itself orthodoxy is anything but. Orthodox means correct teaching. Okay? It basically, they self-labeled themselves as being right. And the rest of us who are thinking beings are going to say, yeah, right. We're not buying that. Well, why should we not buy that? Simple. By their fruits you shall know them. What did they do? What did they do? Now, Christ was not going out there pounding people with the truth. He didn't go out there and tell people what to believe. He was the opposite of that. So if you want to know what is anti-Christ, it's the one who's going to tell you what to believe. This is right and that is wrong. Okay, let me explain that. So obviously, Christians like to go around and say, Jesus is the Christ. Accept Jesus as the Christ or you're going to hell. Well, if Jesus is our teacher and our exemplar, and he didn't do that, why is that appropriate? Why do we ignore the teacher and place ourselves above the teacher and tell him what's right? He wouldn't even tell Peter. He waited for Peter to discover. That's it right there. That's the key. You don't go and pound people with the information and demand that they acknowledge it and threaten them if they don't. That's satanic. No, you encourage, you inspire, you help them discover it for themselves. That's what Christ literally did and showed us how to do that. So if that's what if he's demonstrating that, if he's like, he says, do as I do, and he's doing that, why would we do anything else? And so, but the orthodoxy, they went far beyond that, way far beyond that, right? The orthodoxy, so at the time Jesus died, right? Remember who killed him, by the way. Pontius Pilate killed him. The Romans killed him. Why? They were in charge. They were the government, right? They are in charge, and they held a trial, and only they could execute him. Now, this is, they tried to cover this up in the scriptures, right? They even wrote, the Jews said, we have no law to put a man to death, so we're sending him back to you. And Pilate says, they try to gloss over his responsibility, but he's like, I wash my hands of this. Well, that's ridiculous. A judge cannot wash his hands of justice, right? If you declare somebody innocent and you still let people kill him, that don't wash off, right? So it says he washed his hands, but that's bull. Forget that. That's irony. We're supposed to not accept that, okay? As a matter of fact, throughout the whole thing, Rome is the evil empire. They have come in, they've oppressed this people, they're pagan, they don't know God, and somehow they become the good guys, and this church that Jesus started, the man who was killed by Rome, becomes the Holy Roman Empire. Come here, you. So, all right. So there's a Holy Roman Empire now. That's fascinating. And you might ask yourself, like, how did this Jewish sect become the Holy Roman Empire and then become anti-Semitic and persecute the Jews? Like, it's fascinating. Well, there's a process in all of that, right? It didn't just happen. I mean, for quite some time, the Romans were they were feeding Christians to the lions. It was illegal to be a Christian. It was illegal to believe in Jesus, right? And somehow it became legal. Well, it became legal with Constantine. Constantine was the person who said, okay, we're ending the persecution. It was around 325 AD. And Constantine, obviously, he didn't just wake up one day. Well, there's a lie that says he had a vision of a cross in the sky. We don't need to believe this stuff. The reality of it is he made alliances with the Orthodox Church. They weren't Orthodox yet. That's why Bart Ehrman calls them the Proto-Orthodox. They haven't established themselves as the Orthodoxy. And how did they establish themselves as the Orthodoxy? It's because they made those alliances with high officials in Rome. The powers of the world. The corrupt powers of the world. And so because they established themselves by this liaison to the power structure of the day, to the evil empire, they then had the muscle and clout to turn the power of Rome against their ideological enemies, which are other Christians, other Christian groups, the heretics, as they later became known. So by their fruits you shall know them. The orthodoxy are the murderers. They're the ones who had the power, who had the connections with Rome, who compromised their faith, right? Who allowed Rome to temper the tenets of Christianity, to change things, to approve this is Scripture, that is not Scripture. This is a doctrine we will allow, that is a doctrine we will not allow. And then they began to persecute those with different doctrines. They ended up participating in mind control. Hey, buddy. They began to participate in mind control. They began to oppress freedoms. They began to murder. So if we want to ask ourselves, who's satanic and who is not? See, the Gnostics didn't do that. The Gnostics were the peaceful followers of Christ. They believed they had traditions that came down from Christ, but they also had access to revelation. And that's a real key thing, because when individuals, private individuals, are able to obtain revelation for themselves, then they have freedom. And that is the most dangerous thing to any corrupt institution. Because institutions, by definition, are anti-freedom. And authorities are anti-freedom. No, you can't decide what's true. I decide what's true. I tell you what's true. Right? And that's every church, institution, or institutional church. Right? The real meaning of church is community. But the institutional church, the organizational church, those are about power and money. This is why it always gets corrupted. Every single prophet, mystic, or guru who ever lived came to earth, had a vision, had a way to free the people, and their teachings, their movement was subverted by the people that usually killed them, and infiltrate their movement and then turn it into a system of oppression, which is exactly what Christianity became. I mean, the entire Christian history is one of war and murder and burning people alive because of their beliefs. And if you want to read about the persecution of the Gnostics, which I recommend, read Bart Ehrman's Lost Christianities. It talks about the different groups of Christians, because there wasn't just one. And it talks about who did the killing and when they did the killing and why they did the killing and how they took over the church. Is that in the Bible? Yes, there's a prophecy in the Bible, because the end times can't come unless there's a falling away first. And there will be a restitution of all things, or a refreshing. So you can look these words up on the internet, but you'll find the verses. You know, Peter talks about it. So, and if you want to learn more about it, read the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is very specific about what happened in Christian history, and it talks about what it calls the great and abominable church, the Satanic Church. And it was the Christian church in the Middle Ages. It was the church that was burning heretics at the stake. Very plainly. Well, what does the Book of Mormon say about them? It says that they slay the saints, that they persecute the saints, the peaceable followers of Christ, the people who wanted to really follow his message when he was saying connect with the Spirit and the Spirit will teach you the truth of all things. When Jesus was talking about personal revelation to you, he was saying you can learn from the Spirit. And that threatens the orthodoxy, threatens the Satanic Church. So it's really self-explanatory. Who are the Satanists and who are the Christians? The Gnostics are the Christians because Christ preaches revelation. And the Orthodoxy are the Satanists because they murder the saints. And they kill the Spirit. And they end revelation. And they end miracles. And they end the gifts of God. They end everything that's good and replace it with oppression, as they've always done. And the Book of Mormon goes on to say, and the harlots, and the fine linen, and the expensive buildings. It's what it's always been about. I mean, all of these, and it doesn't matter because the Mormons have these cathedrals now too. You know, millions of dollars in property and real estate, expensive clothing, everything. And the human trafficking. You know, I mean, we live in the 20th century where we live in the 20th century, okay, where we now have access to information. We can blow the whistle on things that would have remained secret in all times previous to this. I mean, you think it's bad now? It was terrible before. Only people got away with criminal behavior all the time before now. Now everybody's got a cell phone and they can take pictures and they can, you know, it's still not perfect. There's still tons of things that go unpunished, right? But it's better, actually, right now. You know, but even today in the modern era, something like nearly 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3 children is molested. You know, and there's so many rapes and things that are not reported, right? And the churches, not any one church, the Catholics, the Mormons, every church, nobody's free of scandal, right? And so this is a problem we cannot assume began in our era. It's been with us all along. And if we're talking about a church that was formerly willing to arrest people and put Galileo Galilei on house arrest because he dared to suggest that the earth was not the center of the universe, then, and willing to burn people alive and do way worse things than that for having religious, for saying, you know, I don't appreciate or approve of the priesthood being bought and sold, and for it being corrupt, and for you selling indulgences. This is not the gospel. We're not living it. If you said that, you had to either recant or they would burn you alive. So it's very clear that is the great and abominable church. They were inspired by something. I mean, no matter what you say, like, the thing that motivated them to do that is not the Spirit of God. It's the spirit of the devil. And, by the way, throughout the entire Renaissance, throughout the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was the ones that ran every single orphanage. I mean, what do you think happened? It's beyond description what happened. And we know that. That is our history. Humanity's history, humanity's legacy, the church's legacy. But it was prophesied. And it's also our future. Unless we understand the process. If we understand corruption, if we understand following the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the law, if we understand making human beings our leaders and following them blindly, or instead going to God, going to the Spirit, receiving revelation, knowing truth for ourselves. And that's all that the Book of Mormon is about. And the reason we started talking about Gnosticism, talked about Mormonism, but listen, all religions have truth and all religions have error, but the Book of Mormon is Gnostic. As a matter of fact, you wouldn't even be talking about Gnosticism if it wasn't for the Nag Hammadi library, which was discovered and dug up out of the ground, which contained scriptures that had been hidden up, exactly as the Book of Mormon was discovered a century earlier. Engraved on metal plates. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls are also engraved on metal plates. You know, if you're paying attention, these things are a type, right? You say, boom, there's something, and there's something exactly like it. There's a few differences between them, but you know, I'm supposed to draw a connection. So if you step back, you say, well, there's a huge connection. The Nag Hammadi library and the Dead Sea Scrolls are both collections of books, like the Bible, written by people who believe in the Bible, who believed in revelation, who believed in miracles, who received revelation from God and wrote. And that also describes the Book of Mormon. So what does the Book of Mormon say? Well, Mormons don't get it. It says everything opposite to what the Mormons believe. Because they're living out exactly what they describe of the Catholic Church. It starts in purity. It goes into apostasy. The spiritual gifts are stifled. Worldliness takes over. Corruption happens. Why? Well, it says, because people lean on the arm of flesh. Well, what does that mean, to lean on the arm of flesh? It means that your leader, your prophet, is a human. And if you think he's inerrant, he's going to dominate you and own you and lead you to hell. That's what it means. That's exactly what it's talking about. So the Book of Mormon was a way to not be enslaved by the dang Catholics. And it was a way to not be enslaved by the dang Protestants, because they were just as bad. Like, they wouldn't. You think Protestantism fixed it? It didn't. You couldn't be a pastor in any Protestant church unless you paid your dues. You had to go to school. You had to learn the garbage they packaged and handed right to you. And you had to pay their money. And you had to do what they say. So you had to sacrifice your freedom. And you had to parrot their false doctrine. And if you received a revelation they didn't approve of, they defrocked you and kicked you out, and you were done. So you still had slavery with Protestantism. You know, it was just a different flavor of it. It was a different flavor of apostasy, and that's the whole point of why Joseph Smith existed in the first place, is to say, new paradigm. I'm a prophet because I talked to God. I talk to an angel, and you can too. Did he want everybody to do that? Of course he did. Now, have they changed some of his words too? Yes. They have. But we can still see what he did, what he said. He said to be saved, you have to become a prophet. You have to become a Gnostic. Because they're the same thing. You have to receive your own knowledge, spiritual knowledge. He instituted a school of the prophets. There's prophecies that in this last days, we would become a prophetic people. That the old men would see, that the young men would see visions and the old men would dream dreams. The old and the young. And not just men, women too. But what's the alternative? Well, you know, the Book of Mormon's all about miracles happening. You don't need a church, right? It says that there's only 2 churches, right? The Book of Mormon says there's only 2 churches. It's not the Mormon church. But first of all, there's 250 Mormon churches. And the one in Utah is clearly not it. They have been found in, I'd say, 4 courts of law to not be the real Mormon church anyway. Yeah, but all roads point to Rome. Rome is apostasy, and in the Mormon church, all roads point to its apostasy. But there's only 2 churches according to the Book of Mormon. Church of God, Church of the Devil. And they're both transcendent churches. So it doesn't matter which human organization you belong to. If you're doing the will of Satan, you belong to the Church of Satan. If you're doing the will of Christ, who is the King of all churches, then you belong to the Church of Christ. What? So, yeah, you know, that gives you an overview of some of the things that I'm looking at when I determine who is satanic and who isn't. What is satanic, what isn't. I mean, Christ is love. Satanic is whatever's not love. But, you know, I think mystics are love. Mystics love the world. They love the truth. They want to pursue the truth, right? Orthodox says, I'm afraid of the truth. You, the authority, package it up and hand it to me. You're very annoying. Come here. You package it up and hand it to me. You tell me what's right and what's wrong. You tell me what I can believe in. You know, there's no human development, there's no spiritual development that happens in that environment. There's just control. Is God about control? Well, Mormonism would say no. Because in Mormonism, the whole world got here because there was a battle over freedom. Where Satan said, I will take away people's freedom, but everyone will choose the right. Everyone will do the right, and there will be perfection. But that was satanic. In that vision, Christ got to enact a plan that would allow for freedom. And in that freedom, there would be wickedness, there would be hardship, there would be suffering, as he says, woe unto the world because of offenses, for it is necessary that offenses come. Yet, woe unto the one by whom the offense comes. And that says it all. So, anyway, that gives our overview. You have to decide. Now, Gnosticism isn't about comprehending all that, right? Because you can comprehend all that and it can make perfect sense to you. But that doesn't mean you're a Gnostic. And it doesn't mean that you're receiving gnosis or wisdom or knowledge, excuse me. But it'll give you access to open the door to receive that. So hearing what other people have learned, or what they're being exposed to, or what's happening and unfolding in their lives can create possibility for you. And in that possibility, anything can happen. And whatever happens is personal to you. And that personal aspect is central to Gnosticism. Because it's about what you discover. Orthodoxy wants to condemn. They bribe you with heaven, they threaten you with hell, and they want to condemn you and scare you away from doing anything that they can't control. And that's really their whole motivation. Mysticism, Gnosticism, is the opposite. It's about your self-discovery. And if you have faith, if you're a faithful person, you have faith, then you're not afraid of what someone else is going to discover. Fear is of the devil. God doesn't give you a spirit of fear. He gives you a spirit of power and a sound mind. Right? You're not afraid of what somebody's going to discover. Like if I have a son or daughter, and I say, discover the truth, right? A fear-based person doesn't want them to go discover the truth. Fear-based person says, well, you might discover the wrong truth. Let me just force feed you the truth, my truth, right? That's fear-based. It's satanic because it's fear-based. It lives in the spirit of fear. You stop. But God is in the spirit of power. He says, you know what? I'm going to let you have your freedom. And you might have suffering, but you'll learn from the suffering. And after the suffering, you'll have salvation. The suffering will lead you to truth, ultimately. It might be a long road. It might be an interesting road. But I have faith in you and what you'll produce. I have faith in God. I have faith in the Spirit. The Spirit runs everything. God is ever present. And what he creates in people's lives, he will lead them. He will lead them to that discovery eventually. It might take more than one life. But if you really do have faith, you'll give people freedom. You won't sit there and worry. And that's what all the Christians do. They're like, oh no, it's imperative right now. Nope. They do a lot of judgment. They have a lot of excuses for why they can judge. But it really is all satanic. It is all fear-based. It lives in the spirit of fear. Now, I get not being diligent, right? Not being proactive, right? But there's a difference between living in fear or acting out of fear and acting out of sloth. Not acting in someone's best interest. Anyway, you have to have the Spirit of God in you to figure out what those things are anyway. And it's different for everybody. Everybody's in a different place. So, but I have faith in you. Pray about it. Ponder it. But put the ego aside, put the fear aside, put everything aside, and just bathe in the Spirit. Open yourself up. Receive knowledge. Search it out for yourself. I have faith. God will lead you to the answer. I don't know when or how, but if you completely put yourself aside and you dedicate yourself to the search, you'll find it. Seek and you will find. God bless.